The morning air at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam carried the weight of history. February 12, 2026. The sun climbed over the Ko'olau Mountains, casting long shadows across the tarmac, where a C-17 Globemaster sat silent, its cargo bay open like a steel mouth waiting to be fed. Brigadier General Cassandra Thorne stepped off a civilian shuttle bus. She wore an olive-drab flight suit. No name tape, no rank, no unit patch. The fabric was pristine, sterile, anonymous. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe regulation bun. She carried a single duffel bag over her shoulder and a locked aluminum case in her left hand. She looked like 1,000 other technical contractors who passed through this base every month. That was the point. Cass walked toward the bachelor officer quarters, her boots silent on the concrete. Around her, the base hummed with its morning rhythm. A formation of sailors in dress whites marched past their cadence, sharp and mechanical. An F-22 Raptor screamed overhead, afterburners painting contrails across the cloudless sky. In the distance, the USS Arizona Memorial sat perfectly still in the harbor, a white structure suspended above the sunken battleship that had burned here 85 years before. Cass had studied the casualty reports from that day. 1,177 sailors entombed beneath the water. She thought about them often, about how quickly order becomes chaos, how leadership failures compound, how men die when systems fail. She checked into her quarters with minimal conversation. The desk sergeant, a young airman named Cooper, barely looked up from his screen. He handed her a key card and pointed toward Building 7. Room 214, ma'am. Chow hall's across the street. You need anything else? No, thank you. Her voice was low, clear, deliberate. She did not smile. She never smiled during operations. Room 214 was identical to every BOQ she had ever occupied. A narrow bed, a desk, a small closet, a bathroom with industrial fixtures. The walls were beige, the carpet was gray. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air conditioning. Cass set the duffel on the bed and the aluminum case on the desk. She opened the case with a numeric code. Inside, nested in custom-cut foam, was a collection of items that told the story of a different life. A silver star, a pair of shoulder boards with the single gleaming insignia of a brigadier general, a name tape that read Thorne, a unit patch showing a phoenix rising from flames, its wings designed to look like satellite antennas. Around the edge, silver threads spelled out the words, Fides Antennas, faith in the antennas. She picked up the phoenix patch and ran her thumb over the embroidery. It had been 8 months since she had worn it. 8 months since she had been Brigadier General Cassandra Thorne, Special Assistant to the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 8 months since she had sat in the tank at the Pentagon and listened to Vice Admiral Morrison describe the problem. The flashback came unbidden, sharp as a knife. June 23rd, 2025. The Pentagon, the tank. A windowless conference room deep in the building's core lined with sound-dampening panels and secure screens. 6 flag officers sat around the polished oak table. Cass sat at the end, a folder marked Top Secret in front of her. Vice Admiral Morrison stood at the head of the table. He was a tall man with iron gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent 30 years at sea. He gestured to the screen behind him, which displayed a series of incident reports. 3 major accidents in the past 18 months, Morrison said. USS Fitzgerald, USS John S. McCain, and most recently the collision between an Air Force KC-135 and a Navy E-2 during a routine refueling operation over the South China Sea. 17 personnel killed, 4 aircraft destroyed, combined losses exceeding $800 million. He paused. The room was silent. The official investigations blame fatigue training, deficiencies, procedural errors, all true, all symptoms, but not the disease. Morrison tapped the screen. A new slide appeared, a network diagram showing the command structure of a typical joint operation. It was a spiderweb of lines and boxes, each one representing a layer of authority. The disease, Morrison continued, is culture, specifically a culture where rank is confused with competence, where ego overrides judgment, where officers believe their position grants them infallibility. He looked directly at Cass. General Thorne, you've spent the past 5 years developing red cell assessments for our C4I networks. You find vulnerabilities by thinking like the enemy. We need you to do the same thing for our command culture. Find the weakness, expose it, force the system to correct itself. Cass had nodded slowly. What's the operational framework? Complete anonymity. You'll strip your rank, your credentials, your identity. You'll embed at a major joint base and observe from the ground up. No one will know who you are except me and the vice chairman. You'll have full authority to document, record, and report, but you will not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Morrison leaned forward. We need to know if the system can recognize and correct toxic leadership when it's staring them in the face. If it can't, we need to redesign the system. Cass had looked at the Phoenix patch sitting on the table in front of her. Faith in the antennas, faith in the signals, faith in the truth buried beneath the noise. When do I start? Immediately. Cass blinked. The memory dissolved. She was back in room 214 holding the Phoenix patch. She placed it carefully back in the foam cutout and closed the case. Then she opened her duffel and began unpacking. 6 hours later, she sat alone in the dining facility, known as DFAC-2. It was a massive industrial space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the channel. Beyond the glass, the Arizona Memorial gleamed white against the blue water. Cass ate slowly, methodically. Baked chicken, steamed rice, green beans. She had learned long ago to treat meals as fuel, nothing more. Around her, the lunch rush swirled. Navy whites, Marine Corps camouflage, Air Force blues, Army greens, the clatter of trays, the murmur of conversation. The distant roar of a cargo plane taking off from the Hickam side of the base. Cass watched. She always watched. At table 7-3, enlisted airmen argued about football. At table 12, a young Marine lieutenant sat alone staring at his phone, his face tight with worry. At table 19, a Navy commander held court with 6 junior officers, his voice loud and full of self-importance. He gestured expansively, and the junior officers laughed on cue. Cass noted the dynamic. Hierarchy. Performance. The unspoken rules of who spoke and who listened. She had filled 3 pages in her secure log already. 15 friction points. 15 moments where ego and authority clashed with reality. She took a sip of water and glanced at her tablet. On the screen, disguised as a technical manual, was the operational timeline for Wardroom Pacific. The exercise would begin in 36 hours. It would involve 3 carrier strike groups, 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, and 4 Air Force wings. Over 40,000 personnel, 300 aircraft, 50 ships. And every single one of them would be tested by a scenario Cass herself had designed 6 months ago. She had named it Spectral Cascade, a polymorphic electronic warfare attack that would turn the network against itself. A ghost in the machine. It was elegant, brutal, and designed specifically to expose one fundamental question. What happens when technology fails and leaders must rely on judgment instead of data? Cass had built the scenario with one assumption in mind, that the people who held authority would not necessarily be the people who held competence. And when the two collided, the system would reveal its true character. She closed the tablet and returned to her meal. That was when the main doors of the DFAC swung open. Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore entered like a man who owned the building. He was 52 years old, barrel-chested with a square jaw and the kind of tan that came from years on carrier decks. His summer whites were starched to the point of rigidity. His chest was a billboard of achievement, ribbons stacked 4 rows high, the gold Navy parachutist badge, the gold naval aviator wings, the gleaming shoulder boards of a 2-star admiral. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Behind him walked 4 people, 2 young lieutenants, both in their mid-20s, both with the eager, hungry look of officers desperate to please. Lieutenant Marcus Parrish was tall and blond, with a jawline that looked chiseled from marble. Lieutenant Kyle Brennan was shorter, stockier, with red hair and freckles. They flanked Whitmore like security guards. Behind them walked Commander Elliot Hargrove. He was 38, slim, with dark hair graying at the temples and the careful, neutral expression of a man who had learned to survive by reading the room. He was Whitmore's flag aide. His job was to anticipate the Admiral's needs and manage his schedule and shield him from unpleasantness. And finally, Lieutenant Commander Bridget Ashford, 34, blonde with the crisp efficiency of a career staff officer. She was the flag secretary. She carried a tablet and walked half a step behind Hargrove. Whitmore's eyes swept the DFAC. He dismissed the enlisted tables immediately. His gaze moved to the officer section evaluating measuring. Then he saw it. Table 42, a 4-person table near the expansive plate glass windows. The best view in the house, looking directly out over the channel, over the memorial, over the harbor, where Pearl Harbor had burned 85 years ago. And sitting at that table alone, it was a woman in a plain flight suit. Whitmore's expression shifted. Not anger? Not yet. Just calculation. Opportunity. He pointed. Look at this. His voice was loud. It cut across the ambient noise of the DFAC. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Heads turned. Prime real estate. Whitmore continued. Occupied by... He squinted. What is that A flight line mechanic? Lieutenant Parrish laughed. Lieutenant Brennan joined in a beat later. Commander Hargrove's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Whitmore led his group directly toward table 42. Cass did not look up. She brought a forkful of rice to her mouth with unshakable steadiness. She chewed, swallowed, placed the fork neatly on her plate. Whitmore stopped at the edge of the table. He planted his hands on his hips, casting a large shadow over her. She did not look up. Excuse me. His voice was booming, theatrical, designed for an audience. Cass finished chewing. She swallowed. She placed her fork on her plate. Then slowly she raised her eyes to meet his. They were dark, analytical, utterly placid. You're in our spot, Sergeant. The rank was deliberate, a demotion, an insult. Cass was not wearing any rank at all, but Whitmore had chosen Sergeant. Air Force, enlisted, 2 steps below officer, a calculated diminishment. Cass did not react. She simply looked at him. Her silence was more unnerving than any protest. Lieutenant Parrish stepped forward, emboldened by the Admiral's swagger. You heard the Admiral. This table is reserved for senior leadership. Scram! Cass turned her gaze to Parrish. It was a brief, dispassionate assessment, like a scientist observing a specimen. Then she looked back at Whitmore. This is a general dining facility, she said. Her voice was low, clear, without inflection. There are no reserved tables. Whitmore's smile was predatory. He loved this. A little public discipline to keep the lower ranks on their toes. It reminded everyone who held the power. I'm making it reserved now, he said. I'll ask you one more time out of professional courtesy. Get up and find another seat. Cass picked up her fork. The intention was clear. She was going to resume her meal. I am not finished. The Admiral's face flushed crimson. The laughter from his aides died. The nearby tables had gone completely quiet. Every eye in the DFAC was now on this confrontation. This was no longer about a table. It was about authority, about order, about who decided the rules and who obeyed them. Whitmore turned his head slightly, not taking his eyes off Cass. Commander Hargrove, have these 2 gentlemen escort this individual from my table. Lieutenant Parrish and Lieutenant Brennan grinned. They cracked their knuckles in a pantomime of force. Commander Hargrove hesitated. Admiral, perhaps we could just take the next table over. Whitmore's voice dropped to ice. Are you questioning my order, Commander? Hargrove's face went blank. No, Admiral. He looked at Cass. There was something in his eyes, a silent plea, a warning. She ignored it. Lieutenant Parrish reached for her arm. All right, lady, let's go. His hand had not yet made contact when she moved. It was not a strike. It was a fluid biomechanical redirection. As his fingers brushed the fabric of her flight suit, Cass pivoted on the ball of her foot. Her body flowed around his outstretched arm like water. Her left hand cupped his elbow joint. Her right hand gently guided his wrist. She used his forward momentum against him. A simple application of leverage. She spun him off balance. He stumbled, not falling but lurching awkwardly sideways. He collided with Lieutenant Brennan, who had been moving in behind him. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. It was graceful, efficient, utterly devoid of aggression. It was the application of physics, not a fight. It was the kind of technique taught at exactly one place in the Air Force, the Special Tactics School at Hurlburt Field, Florida. A course reserved for field-grade officers in special operations and intelligence. The 2 lieutenants untangled themselves. Their faces were a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Cass was already seated again. Her posture was unchanged. She had not spilled a drop of water from her glass. The hush in the DFAC deepened. Whitmore stared. For a moment he was speechless. He had expected resistance, protest, something he could punish. He had not expected a lesson in judo performed with the detached air of someone solving a minor engineering problem. He recovered quickly. His fury masked his astonishment. Assault? He roared. You just assaulted a naval officer. I want your name and your unit right now. You are in a world of trouble. Cass calmly reached into a pocket on her thigh. She withdrew a small black tablet. She tapped the screen once. The faint sound of Whitmore's voice played back for a fraction of a second. Assault, you just assaulted. She silenced it. She had been recording. A receipt. She looked up at him. Her face was as impassive as stone. My name is Thorne. Whitmore's jaw worked. Your rank, Thorne. What is your rank? She did not answer. She held his gaze for 3 long seconds. A silent challenge that was anything but insubordinate. It was a statement of fact, an invitation for him to dig his own hole deeper. He was standing at the edge, and she was simply watching him. Insubordination, Whitmore snarled. Disrespect to a flag officer. Assault. I'll have you in the brig before sundown. His voice shook with rage. I am Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore, commander of Carrier Strike Group 5, Forward Deployed Element. Now you will tell me your rank, or I will have the Master-at-Arms drag you out of here in cuffs. Cass simply took a slow sip of water. Then she picked up her tray. The meal was half-eaten. She stood. She walked past the stunned Admiral and his cohort, past the silent watching sailors and airmen. She placed her tray on the return rack. She did not look back. She walked out of the dining facility and into the humid Hawaiian air. Her expression was unchanged. Behind her, Whitmore stood in the center of the DFAC, his chest heaved, his fists clenched. The room had become a monument to his public overreach. He had demanded her rank, and her silence was the loudest answer he had ever received. He was determined to make her pay for it. Commander Hargrove watched her leave. His mind was racing. He replayed the sequence in his head. The pivot, the leverage, the control. It was textbook. It was exact. It was not something a civilian contractor would know. He leaned close to Lieutenant Commander Ashford. That wasn't luck, he whispered. That was training. Ashford frowned. What kind of training? The kind that enlisted personnel don't get. Whitmore turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit, his face still crimson. Hargrove and the others followed. As they stepped outside, Whitmore pointed at Hargrove. I want formal charges filed. Assault on a commissioned officer. Willfully disobeying a lawful order. Conduct unbecoming. I want it on the base commander's desk within the hour. Hargrove swallowed. Admiral, we don't know who she is. A sterile flight suit could mean... I don't care if she's the Secretary of Defense's personal yoga instructor, Whitmore snapped. She assaulted 2 of my officers and publicly defied a flag officer. The rules are the rules. We make an example of her, or we lose control of the whole damn ship. This is about discipline. Hargrove nodded slowly. Yes, sir. But as they walked back toward the headquarters building, Hargrove could not shake the image of her eyes. They were not angry. They were not scared. They were diagnostic, like she was watching a predictable chemical reaction unfold. Cass returned to her quarters. She opened the aluminum case and looked at the Phoenix patch one more time. Then she closed it. She sat at the desk and powered on her laptop. The interface was stark. Text only, a secure log file that existed on an encrypted partition invisible to any standard scan. She typed 1235 Zulu, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, DFAC-2. Encounter with Rear Admiral G. Whitmore, USN. Subject exhibited behavior consistent with status-based aggression, verbal provocation, misidentification of rank/branch, escalation to physical removal via proxy. Proxies neutralized via a minimal force. Redirection method 7. B. Joint control/off balancing. Subject vocally alleged assault. Full audio/video of encounter log locally. File ref 70 Whitmore. No further action required at this time. Awaiting subject's next move. She saved the entry. The log was filled with similar entries. A meticulous, dispassionate catalog of every institutional friction point she had encountered since arriving at Pearl Harbor. Each one was a data point, part of a larger pattern. Whitmore was just the latest, the loudest signal in a sea of noise. She closed the log and pulled up the schedule for the week. Wardroom, Pacific exercise. T-36 hours. The main event. Cass leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the scenario she had built. Spectral cascade. A polymorphic attack that would exploit the one thing every modern military system depended on: trust in the network. She had designed it to be brutal. To strip away the technological crutches and force leaders to rely on judgment, instinct, and competence. To expose whether they had those qualities or whether they had simply been promoted into incompetence. And now she knew exactly who would fail. Whitmore. She had suspected it from the moment she read his file. The pattern was clear. A career built on aggression and charisma, not collaboration or critical thinking. A man who commanded through intimidation, not inspiration. A man who believed his rank made him infallible. The perfect test case. Cass opened a second file. A personnel record. Garrett Whitmore, 52 years old, 30 years of service. Naval Academy graduate. Fighter pilot. Strike Group commander. Decorated. Respected. On paper, he was exemplary. But Cass had learned long ago that paper lied. She thought back to another file, one she did not need to open because She had memorized it years ago, her own file. The incident that had changed everything. 2018, 8 years ago, somewhere over the mountains of eastern Syria, Cass had been a weapons systems officer in the backseat of an F-15 E-Strike Eagle. Her pilot was Major Rick Donovan, a calm, methodical flyer with 15 years of experience. They were supporting a ground operation, a Marine unit pinned down by enemy fire in a valley below. The forward air controller had radioed for close air support. Danger close. Friendlies within 50 meters of the target. Cass had locked the coordinates. She had confirmed with the FAC. She had double-checked the targeting pod feed. Everything looked clear, but the voice on the radio had been stressed, panicked, and in the chaos of the moment, the FAC had transposed 2 digits in the grid coordinates. Cass had not caught it. Donovan had not caught it. They had dropped 2 500-pound JDAMs exactly where they were told, 50 meters from the enemy position, and directly on top of 4 Marine infantrymen who had been moving to flank. The explosion vaporized them. Cass had seen the smoke plume. She had heard the screaming on the radio, the FAC's voice broken and desperate. Check fire, you hit us, you hit us. The investigation had cleared her, cleared Donovan, cleared everyone. It was a communication failure, a tragic accident, the fog of war. But Cass had never forgiven herself. 4 men, 4 fathers, 4 sons, dead because someone transposed 2 digits and no one caught it. She had requested a transfer out of strike aviation the next day. She had moved into electronic warfare, into C4I, into the invisible world of signals and networks where precision mattered more than aggression, where listening mattered more than shouting. She had spent the next 8 years learning how to prevent that kind of failure, how to design systems that caught human error, how to build cultures where people questioned authority when authority was wrong. And now she was here, at Pearl Harbor, watching another officer make the same mistakes she had seen 100 times before, confusing confidence with competence, confusing rank with correctness. She was going to stop it. The knock on her door came at 17:30 hours. Cass was not surprised. She opened the door. Standing in the hallway was Chief Master Sergeant Donovan Kane. He was 48 years old, tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair, and the weathered face of someone who had spent 28 years in the Air Force. His uniform was immaculate. His ribbons told the story of a man who had been everywhere and done everything. He did not salute. He simply looked at her. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was gravelly respectful. "May I have a word?" Cass stepped aside. Kane entered. She closed the door. Kane stood in the center of the small room, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the closed aluminum case on the desk, then at Cass. "I was in the DFAC," he said. "I saw what happened." Cass said nothing. Kane continued. "I've been at this base for 3 years. I've seen Admiral Whitmore do that exact thing a dozen times. He picks a target, someone who looks out of place, someone who won't fight back, and he makes a show of authority, keeps people in line." Cass folded her arms. "And," Kane smiled faintly, "and you're not someone who looks out of place. You look like someone pretending to look out of place." Cass raised an eyebrow. Kane gestured toward the case. "That technique you used, I saw it once before, at Hurlburt. I was there for a joint exercise in 2019. Watched a special tactics instructor demonstrate the exact same move. He said it was taught exclusively to field-grade officers in sensitive billets." Cass did not react. Kane's smile widened. "I don't know who you are, ma'am, and I don't need to know. But I do know you're not a civilian contractor. And I know Admiral Whitmore just made a very big mistake." Cass held his gaze for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. "Chief, if someone were to ask you what you saw today, what would you say?" Kane straightened. "I'd say I saw an admiral abuse his authority and a professional handle it with minimal force and maximum restraint. I'd say I saw someone who knows how to de-escalate a situation instead of making it worse." Cass nodded slowly. "Good answer." Kane turned to leave. Then he paused at the door. "One more thing, ma'am. The exercise starts day after tomorrow. Word is it's going to be a rough one. Admiral Whitmore has been talking it up. Says his strike group is going to dominate." Cass allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. "We'll see." Kane nodded. "Yes, ma'am, we will." He left. Cass closed the door and returned to her desk. She opened the exercise parameters one more time. Spectral cascade. A ghost in the machine. A test of leadership under pressure. Whitmore had no idea what was coming, but Cass did. She had built it. At 0430 the next morning, Cass woke in the dark. She dressed in her sterile flight suit. She laced her boots. She walked out into the Hawaiian night. The base was silent. A few lights glowed in distant buildings. The runways were empty. The harbor was still. Cass walked to the edge of the water. She stood on the concrete embankment and looked out at the Arizona Memorial. The white structure was illuminated by floodlights, suspended above the black water like a ghost. She thought about the 1,177 sailors entombed below. She thought about the 4 Marines in Syria. She thought about every life lost because someone made a decision based on ego instead of judgment. She stood there for 30 minutes, breathing, centering, preparing. At 0500, she walked back to her quarters. She showered. She ate a protein bar. She opened her laptop and reviewed the exercise timeline one final time. And then she waited. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Whitmore had filed his complaint. The system was now engaged. All Cass had to do was let it play out. Commander Hargrove sat in his office at 0600, staring at the screen in front of him. The formal complaint was drafted, every word carefully chosen, every accusation framed in the language of military justice. Subject: formal complaint against unknown individual. Thorn charges 1. Assault on commissioned officers, UCMJ. Article 128-2. Willfully disobeying a lawful order from a superior officer, UC. MJ Article 93. Conduct unbecoming UCMJ. Article 133. Hargrove had written it exactly as Whitmore dictated. He had described the encounter in clinical terms. He had framed the woman identified only as Thorn as the aggressor, a subversive element who had instigated the conflict. He had described her calm demeanor as unsettling and her silence as defiance. The report was a masterpiece of curated outrage, designed to provoke an immediate and severe institutional response. But Hargrove could not shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. He read the complaint one more time, then he signed it. He saved the file to a datapad and walked across the manicured lawns of the headquarters complex. The base commander's office was located in Building 1, a 3-story structure overlooking the harbor. Hargrove entered through the main doors and approached the reception desk. Behind the desk sat Chief Master Sergeant Kane. Hargrove blinked. He had not expected Kane to be here. Kane looked up from his screen. His expression was perfectly neutral. "Commander, what can I do for you?" Hargrove held out the datapad. "Formal complaint from Admiral Whitmore. It needs to be delivered to the base commander's office immediately." Kane took the datapad. He glanced at the screen. His face did not change. "The Admiral expects a prompt reply," Hargrove added, feeling foolish as he said it. Kane set the datapad on the desk. "The General's schedule is dynamic. The matter will be addressed in accordance with all applicable regulations." Hargrove froze. "Did you just say the General?" Kane looked at him. "Yes, Commander. The base commander is a general officer. You didn't know?" Hargrove's throat went dry. Number one, I assumed it was an Air Force colonel or a Navy captain." Kane's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, or perhaps pity. "Brigadier General," Kane said. "Air Force. Been here since August of last year. Temporary assignment." Hargrove felt the ground shift beneath him. A general. Whitmore had filed a formal complaint against an unknown individual, and it was being delivered to a general officer. He turned and walked out of the building, his mind racing. By the time he reached Whitmore's office, he was sweating despite the cool morning air. Whitmore looked up from his desk. "Is it done?" Hargrove nodded. "Yes, sir." "Delivered to the base commander's office." Whitmore smiled. "Good. Now we wait." Hargrove opened his mouth, closed it. He wanted to say something, to warn the Admiral. But what could he say? That he had a bad feeling, that the woman's technique was too precise, that Chief Kane had looked at him like he was a dead man walking. He said nothing. The sun climbed higher. The base came fully awake. By 0800, the dining facilities were packed. The flight line was roaring. The harbor was busy with small craft moving between ships and shore. In room 214, Cass sat at her desk. Her secure log was open. She had just finished entering the details of Chief Kane's visit. Her phone buzzed. A single encrypted message. "Wardrum Pacific commences 0800 tomorrow. Final checks complete. All assets in position. Oracle standing by." Cass closed the message. She opened the exercise timeline and reviewed the first phase. Sensor integration checks. Network integrity tests. Routine. Boring, designed to lull everyone into complacency. And then at exactly 14:13 local time tomorrow, spectral cascade would begin. She thought about Whitmore, about the complaint he had filed, about the chain of events he had set in motion. He had created his own receipt, signed his name to it, submitted it into evidence, and now the system would decide what to do with it. Cass stood and walked to the window. She looked out over the base, over the harbor, over the memorial. The first phase was complete. A transgression had occurred. It had been documented. Now she would wait. The Joint Operations Center occupied the entire third floor of Building 12. It was a cathedral of modern warfare, a massive tiered room 3 stories high with rows of workstations descending toward a central floor. At the heart of the space stood a holographic display table 15 feet across, projecting a 3-dimensional map of the Pacific Theater in shimmering blue light. The walls were lined with screens, dozens of them, satellite feeds, radar displays, communications channels, data streams flowing in real time from ships, aircraft, and ground stations scattered across 5,000 miles of ocean. It was 07:55 on Thursday morning, February 13th, 2026. Wardroom Pacific was about to begin. The room hummed with controlled energy. 120 operators sat at their stations. Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Army. A joint force assembled to test the integrated combat systems that were supposed to make modern warfare seamless, efficient, and overwhelming. On the flag bridge overlooking the main floor, Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He wore his summer whites, every ribbon perfectly aligned, every crease razor sharp. He looked down at the holographic map with the satisfaction of a man who believed he controlled the board. Behind him stood Commander Elliot Hargrove, tablet in hand, reviewing the morning briefing notes. Lieutenant Commander Bridget Ashford stood to his left, her own tablet glowing. Lieutenant Parrish and Lieutenant Brennan flanked the group like bodyguards. Whitmore turned to Hargrove. Status: all assets report green, Admiral. 3 carrier strike groups: USS Ronald Reagan, USS Carl Vinson, USS Abraham Lincoln, 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, 4 Air Force wings, total of 42,000 personnel, 287 aircraft, 53 ships. Whitmore nodded. And the opposing force: simulated peer adversary, Chinese doctrine, anti-access area denial tactics. They'll attempt to disrupt our C4I networks, jam our communications, and exploit any vulnerabilities in the kill chain. Whitmore smiled. Let them try. And at 0800 exactly, the exercise director's voice came over the overhead speakers. It was a calm, androgynous, computer-generated voice. No name, no rank, just the designation Oracle. Wardroom Pacific is now active. All units commence Phase 1. Sensor integration and network integrity checks. Good hunting. The tactical display flickered to life. Blue icons representing friendly forces. Red icons representing the simulated enemy. The dance began. For the first 6 hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. Aircraft launched and recovered. Ships maneuvered into formation. Ground units reported readiness. The network processed thousands of data points per second, weaving them into a coherent picture of the battlespace. It was beautiful. It was perfect. Whitmore watched from the flag bridge with growing satisfaction. His strike group was performing flawlessly. Every communication crisp, every maneuver precise. This was what 30 years of experience looked like. This was command. Hargrove stood beside him, monitoring the data feeds. Something nagged at him, a subtle pattern he could not quite identify. The opposing force had been unusually quiet. Too quiet. No probing attacks, no feints, just silence. Admiral, Hargrove said carefully, the Red Force has been passive for the past 4 hours. No activity at all. Whitmore waved dismissively. They're conserving strength, waiting for the right moment to strike. Standard doctrine. Yes, sir, but... Relax, Commander. Everything is under control. Hargrove fell silent, but the unease remained. At 1400 hours local time, the watch changed in the JOC. Fresh operators cycled in. The afternoon shifts settled into their stations. The routine continued. 13 minutes later, everything changed. The first alarm sounded at 1413 Zulu. It was not a klaxon. It was a high-frequency digital chime that echoed through the nerve center of the JOC. The room, usually bathed in cool blue light, was instantly washed in pulsing red strobes. On the tactical display at the center of the room, friendly force icons began to flicker and ghost. An Aegis cruiser, the USS Valley Forge, vanished from the board entirely. A moment later, it reappeared 300 meters from its last known position, heading in the wrong direction. The data link from an entire squadron of F-35s went dead. 12 aircraft, gone from the network. Blind. What the hell is going on? Whitmore demanded from the flag bridge. A young ensign at the C4I console shouted, his voice tight with panic. Massive EW attack, Admiral. The network is collapsing. We're losing data integrity across all domains. His name was Callum Drexler, 24 years old. MIT graduate. Brilliant with code, but completely unprepared for this. His fingers flew across his keyboard, but every command he entered seemed to make things worse. Error messages cascaded across his screen like a digital avalanche. Get it back online, Whitmore ordered. Isolate the corrupted nodes and reboot the system, another operator called out from the SIGINT station. We can't, sir. The attack is polymorphic. Every time we identify a malicious waveform and filter it, it changes signature. It's learning, it's anticipating our countermeasures. The holographic display was now a chaotic storm of false data. Ships appeared in impossible positions. Aircraft showed impossible airspeeds. Ground units reported being simultaneously in 3 different locations. Hargrove stood beside Whitmore, his eyes glued to a secondary screen displaying cascading lines of error code. This was beyond anything they had trained for. The opposing force was not just jamming them, it was not simply blocking their signals. It was turning their own network into a weapon against itself. Sir, we have a priority. One flash. An intelligence officer announced, his voice strained. Automated launch detection from Site Omega. We have 3 inbound ballistic missile signatures. Projected impact Pearl Harbor in 12 minutes. A wave of cold dread washed over the JOC. Site Omega was a known simulated launch facility for the exercise's opposing force. The missiles were not real, but the signatures looked real. The system, compromised and unreliable, was screaming that death was 12 minutes away. And no one could tell if it was telling the truth, Martin. Whitmore's face went pale. His hands gripped the railing. Verify those signatures. Get me Stratcom. Get me NORAD. I need confirmation. Is this drill or is this real? We can't, Admiral, another operator shouted from the communication station. All primary and secondary comms are down. The attack is targeting our satellite uplinks. We're deaf and blind. Panic began to set in. The operators were typing furiously, achieving nothing. The network was fighting them, feeding them ghosts and lies. The holographic display looked like a child's fever dream. Icons spawning and dying. Vectors crossing impossibly. The entire digital representation of the Pacific Theater had become meaningless noise. Whitmore was a master of carrier aviation, of surface warfare, of kinetic operations where you could see the enemy and shoot back. He understood tonnage and speed and explosive yield. But this was a war in the electromagnetic spectrum. Invisible, intangible. A ghost war fought in frequencies his eyes could not see and his mind could not grasp. And he was utterly, completely out of his depth. Get me a hardline to PACOMM, Whitmore demanded, his voice rising. The landlines are compromised too, sir, a technician called back. We're getting loop data, echoes of our own queries. The attack has penetrated every layer of the network infrastructure. The 12-minute clock was ticking down on the main display. 11 minutes, 10 minutes, 9. Ensign Drexler was hyperventilating at his console. His hands shook over the keyboard. Sweat poured down his face. I can't stop it, he whispered. I can't stop it. An older petty officer put a hand on his shoulder. Keep trying, son. Just keep trying. But there was nothing to try. Every defense they mounted was anticipated. Every countermeasure was bypassed. It was like fighting smoke with a sword. Whitmore turned to Hargrove. His face was ashen. What the hell kind of exercise is this? Hargrove's voice was tight. Sir, I think this is exactly what it's supposed to be. A test. A test of what? Of us. Of what we do when everything fails. Whitmore stared at him. Then his attention snapped back to the main display. 8 minutes, 7 minutes. Around the JOC, the panic was becoming palpable. 3 junior operators were requesting permission to evacuate. A Navy lieutenant was on the phone trying to reach his wife on base housing to tell her to get in the car and drive. A Marine captain was praying quietly at his station. The system they had trusted implicitly was betraying them, and they had no answer. Hargrove watched the chaos with a strange, detached clarity. This was brilliant, terrifying but brilliant. Whoever had designed this scenario understood something fundamental, that modern military forces had become so dependent on their technology that they had forgotten how to fight without it. Strip away the network, and what remained? He was about to find out. The main door to the JOC slid open. Cassandra Thorne walked in. She was still wearing the same sterile olive drab flight suit. No rank, no name, no unit. Her hair was pulled back in the same severe bun. She carried nothing except a small black tablet in her left hand. She moved with a preternatural calm, her eyes taking in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The red strobes flashed across her impassive face, painting her in alternating light and shadow. She ignored Whitmore. She ignored the flag bridge entirely. Her attention was fixed on the chaos below. She walked directly down the tiered steps to the main C4I console where Ensign Drexler was on the verge of total collapse. Her boots made no sound on the floor. She moved like a ghost through the panic. Lieutenant Parrish, standing near the flag bridge railing, saw her. His eyes went wide. Recognition and confusion warred on his face. What the hell is she doing here? He moved to intercept her, descending the steps two at a time. Get away from that console, civilian. Cass did not even look at him. She did not break stride. She simply said in a voice that cut through the din like a laser through fog, "Stand down." It was not a request. It was not a suggestion. It was a command that resonated with an authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with absolute certainty. Parrish froze mid-step. Something in her voice stopped him like a physical wall. His hand dropped from where it had been reaching for her shoulder. Cass reached the console. Ensign Drexler was trembling, his hands hovering uselessly over the keyboard. She gently moved him aside with one hand. "Breathe," she told him. Her voice was calm, instructional, almost gentle. "You're chasing ghosts. Stop chasing them." Drexler stepped back, his chest heaving. He watched her with wide eyes. Cass's fingers touched the keyboard. She did not type like someone searching for a solution. She typed like someone executing a plan that already existed fully formed in her mind. She bypassed the primary diagnostic interface entirely. Her fingers flew through command sequences that existed 3 layers deeper than the graphical user interface. She dropped directly into the system's core architecture. Raw Unix commands, hexadecimal strings, the fundamental machine language beneath all the pretty graphics and user-friendly menus. A stream of raw data filled the screen. To everyone else in the room, it was meaningless. A waterfall of numbers and letters and symbols. Digital gibberish. To Cass, it was a conversation, a dialogue between her and the machine, between the attack and the defense, between chaos and order. She spoke to the open air, her voice steady and clear. "Give me a spectral analysis of the noise floor. Focus on the 24 to 58 gigahertz range. Cross-reference with latency patterns in the last 60 seconds. The system responded, a voice command protocol that no one else in the room knew existed. A backdoor she had built into the exercise architecture 6 months ago when she designed this scenario. A complex waveform graph appeared on the screen, peaks and valleys, frequencies dancing across the display like a symphony written in mathematics. Cass studied it for 3 seconds. Her eyes moved across the pattern with the precision of a surgeon reading an X-ray. She saw what no one else could see. "There," she murmured, not to anyone in particular, just thinking aloud. "Not a direct attack. It's a parasitic signal riding the latency residuals between our own network nodes. It's not in the system. It's between the systems, in the echoes, the spaces." Her fingers began typing again. Faster now. She was not patching or filtering. She was writing new code from scratch in real time. A counter algorithm, not designed to block the signal, but to do something far more elegant, to harmonize with it, to oversaturate it with its own methodology, to drown it in its own poison. "The signal is frequency hopping across the band," she explained, her voice calm and instructional, as if she were teaching a class. "But the latency signature is constant. It has to report back to its controller. The signal can't see itself, but we can see the shadow it casts. We can't see the weapon, but we can see the chain it's being pulled on." On her screen, 3 distinct latency spikes appeared. She ran a triangulation algorithm. The spikes converged on a single point deep in the Pacific Ocean, a supposedly empty patch of water 700 miles west of Midway Atoll. "That's the source," Cass declared. She tapped the screen. The simulated adversary submarine controlling the EW platform. Hargrove had descended from the flag bridge. He stood 5 feet behind her, watching with something approaching awe. "We can't target it," he said. "Our targeting data is routed through the compromised network. We'd be firing at our own ships. We'd be shooting blind." "We won't use the network," Cass replied without turning around. She walked away from the console. She crossed the floor to the far wall where a small, forgotten panel sat covered in a thin layer of dust. Most people in the room had never even noticed it. It was labeled in faded stenciled letters, Emergency Telegraphy Circuit. Cass toggled a switch. A small green light flickered on. She picked up a microphone that hung from a coiled cable. It was old, analog, a relic from a different era of warfare. She pressed the transmit button and spoke clearly into the microphone. "This is Oracle." The room went silent. Every head turned. Oracle. The code name for the architect of the entire exercise. The shadowy figure who had designed Wardrome Pacific. The ghost in the machine. The woman in the plane flight suit. Cass continued, her voice steady and clear. "Execute fire mission Trident Dagger. Target coordinates follow." She read off the precise coordinates her algorithm had derived. Latitude, longitude, depth. A string of numbers that represented a point in three-dimensional space 700 miles away. Authentication, Phoenix Alpha Niner. There was a pause. Static crackled over the hardened circuit. Then a voice responded. Male, calm, professional. "Oracle, this is Cheyenne. Authentication confirmed. Trident Dagger is go. Time on target, 45 seconds. On the holographic display, a miracle occurred. A single clean icon appeared through the chaos. A friendly Los Angeles-class submarine, the USS Cheyenne, which had been running silent 300 miles west of the adversary position, waiting for exactly this moment. A thin yellow line extended from its location toward the red target. A simulated torpedo launch. Mark 4880 cap, wire-guided, unstoppable. 45 seconds later, a red X appeared over the adversary submarine's position. And then, like a switch being flipped, everything changed. The ghosting on the tactical display ceased. The false data vanished like smoke. The USS Valley Forge reappeared in its correct position. The F-35 squadron's data links reestablished themselves one by one. The network, its parasitic infection starved of its controller, began to reboot and stabilize. The red alarm strobes shut off. The room plunged back into the cool blue operational glow. The countdown clock stopped at T-minus 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Frozen. The missiles that had never been real disappeared from the display. The entire event, from Cass's entry into the JOC to the neutralization of the threat that had paralyzed a multi-billion-dollar command center, had taken exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Cass stepped back from the emergency panel. She looked at the now stable holographic display, a silent confirmation. Everything was as it should be. Then she turned and looked directly up at the flag bridge, at Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore. Her expression was the same as it had been in the dining facility 2 days ago. Neutral, observant, waiting. She did not speak. She did not explain. She simply looked at him with those dark analytical eyes. And in that moment, Whitmore understood. The silence in the JOC was a physical presence. It was heavier than the alarms that had preceded it, heavier than the panic that had filled the room moments before. The dozens of operators sat frozen at their stations. Their eyes were wide. Their mouths were open. They were not looking at the holographic display. They were not looking at their screens. They were looking at her. And then slowly their gazes shifted upward to the flag bridge, to the stunned pale face of Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore. Whitmore stood rigid. His hands gripped the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. His mind, trained for decades to process threats in terms of tonnage and speed and explosive yield, struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The panic, the imminent simulated failure of his command, the collapse of everything he trusted. All of it had been erased in less than 4 minutes by the one person he had dismissed with utter contempt. He replayed her words in his head. Oracle, Fides Antennas, Phoenix Alpha Niner. These were not random phrases. They were code words from the deepest, most classified annexes of the exercise plan. Oracle was the designated call sign for the exercise director, the person who had designed the entire scenario, who had written the rules, who controlled the opposing force. A position of immense authority operating outside the normal chain of command for the duration of the war game. And he had filed a formal complaint accusing her of assault and insubordination. The sheer monumental stupidity of his actions washed over him like a wave of ice water. He felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with simulated missiles or corrupted networks. This was real. This was personal. This was career-ending. Commander Hargrove was the first to break the spell. He let out a slow, shaky breath. He looked from Cass to the data logs already spooling on his screen, showing the exact command she had entered. The elegant counter algorithm, the latency analysis, the triangulation. It was a level of C4I expertise he had never seen before. Not in 30 years of exercises and operations. It was like watching a grandmaster play chess while everyone else in the room was still learning that pawns could only move forward. He turned to Whitmore. His voice was barely a whisper. "Admiral, your complaint, the one you filed yesterday." Whitmore did not respond. His face was pale, ashen. Down on the JOC floor, the operators began to talk in hushed, urgent tones. "Did you see that she didn't even use the GUI? She wrote a counter algorithm in real time. 3 minutes. She solved it in 3 minutes." "Who is she?" "She said Oracle. That's the exercise director call sign." But Oracle was supposed to be some Air Force colonel in a back room somewhere. Not, not her. Chief Master Sergeant Donovan Kane stood at his console near the back of the room. He had watched the entire event unfold from his vantage point. He was a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent 28 years in uniform. His ribbons told a story of deployments to every corner of the globe. He had seen colonels panic over less. He had seen generals bluster their way through crises they did not understand. He had seen admirals make decisions based on pride rather than wisdom. He had never seen anything like this. Kane slowly pushed his chair back and stood. He walked down the tiered steps, his eyes fixed on Cass. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and why. He stopped a respectful 3 feet from her. He did not speak. He simply looked at her. His gaze took in his sterile flight suit, the calm demeanor, the quiet competence that radiated from her like heat from a fire. His eyes, full of the wisdom of nearly 3 decades of service, saw the truth that others were only beginning to suspect. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a sign of profound professional respect, a silent acknowledgement from one veteran to another, from one person who understood the weight of leadership to another who carried it without announcing it. Cass met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. It was a brief shared moment of understanding that transcended rank and service and the chaos that surrounded them. Whitmore, watching from above, saw the exchange. He saw the difference in Kane's posture, the respect, the recognition. He saw the shift in the room's atmosphere. The mockery he had fostered in the dining hall had curdled into a mixture of confusion, awe, and for him, rapidly dawning horror. He had misread everything. He had mistaken restraint for weakness, silence for ignorance, precision for insubordination. He had confused the map for the territory, and now he was hopelessly, utterly lost. Cass turned without speaking and walked toward the exit. She did not offer explanations. She did not address the room. She had done what needed to be done. That was enough. The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly the operators began to return to their stations. Ensign Drexler sat back down at his console. His hands were still shaking, but he began typing. Running diagnostics, confirming the network stability. Others followed his lead. The room slowly returned to operational tempo. But the energy had changed fundamentally. The swagger was gone, the easy confidence. In its place was something quieter, more careful, more humble. They had just witnessed what real competence looked like, and it had made them all feel very small. Whitmore turned and walked off the flag bridge without a word. Hargrove followed a step behind. They entered a small conference room adjacent to the JOC. Whitmore closed the door. He stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. "That woman," he said slowly, each word forced out like a stone being pulled from his throat, "is the exercise director." Hargrove nodded. "Yes, sir. And I filed formal charges against her." "Yes, sir." Whitmore turned to face him. His face was a mixture of rage and fear, and something that might have been grief. "What have I done?" Hargrove set his tablet on the table. He chose his words carefully. "Sir Oracle is more than just the exercise director. That authentication code, Phoenix Alpha Niner, that's a Joint Chiefs level designation. She's not just Air Force. She's operating under direct authority from the Pentagon, probably from the Vice Chairman himself." Whitmore sat down heavily in a chair. "I accused her of assault, of insubordination. I demanded she be thrown in the brig." "Yes, sir." "And she just saved the entire exercise from complete failure. She solved a problem that had our entire command team paralyzed in less than 4 minutes." "Yes, sir." Whitmore put his head in his hands. "I'm finished." Hargrove wanted to disagree, to offer some reassurance, some path forward, but he could not, because the man was right. A soft chime sounded from Hargrove's tablet. He picked it up. His face went even paler than it already was. "What is it?" Whitmore asked, his voice hollow. "Message from PACOM. A board of inquiry has been convened. Tomorrow morning, 0900, video teleconference, you, me, and he swallowed. And the subject of your complaint. Whitmore closed his eyes. Of course. Hargrove looked at the message again. Sir, there's more. The inquiry is being chaired by Vice Admiral Malcolm Sterling, PACOM Deputy Commander. And the board includes Rear Admiral Constance Reed from JAG and Brigadier General Edmund Cross from Air Force personnel. Whitmore looked up. 3 flag officers for a complaint about a lunch table. It's not about the lunch table anymore, sir. It's about judgment, about leadership, about whether you're fit for command. No, it was about something even larger than that. It was about whether the system could recognize and correct toxic leadership when it was staring them in the face. And Whitmore had just become the test case. That evening, Cass sat in her quarters. The aluminum case was open on her desk. She looked at the Phoenix patch, the silver star, the name tape. Her secure laptop was open. The after-action report from Spectral Cascade was already compiling automatically. Every data log, every communication intercept, every keystroke entered in the JOC during the crisis. It would be disseminated to the highest levels of Pacific Command and the Pentagon within 2 hours. It told a story without narrative or emotion. It showed a system collapsing, a command team paralyzed, and a single operator call sign Oracle intervening with surgical precision to restore order. Attached to the AAR as a cross-referenced file was another document. Rear Admiral Whitmore's formal complaint against an individual named Thorne for events occurring just hours before the exercise commenced. The 2 documents, when read together, painted a picture so damning that it would trigger an immediate high-level response. Cass's phone buzzed. A secure message. Vice Chairman sends congratulations. Spectral Cascade performed exactly as designed. Whitmore exposed. System engaged. Phase 1 complete. Board of Inquiry scheduled for 900 tomorrow. You are requested to attend. Recommend full disclosure of identity at appropriate moment. Well done, General. Cass read the message twice. Then she deleted it. She stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting over the harbor. The Arizona Memorial glowed gold in the fading light. She thought about the 1,177 sailors entombed beneath those waters, about the system failures that had killed them, about the warnings that had been ignored. She thought about the 4 Marines in Syria 8 years ago, about her own failure, about the guilt that had driven her into this work. This was why she did it, not for glory, not for recognition, but to prevent the next mistake, to build systems that caught failures before they became tragedies, to create cultures where people questioned authority when authority was wrong. She returned to her desk and opened her secure log one final time. 1547 Zulu, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, JOC. Spectral Cascade executed as designed. Network collapse induced at 1413 Zulu. Command team failed to respond effectively. Rod M. Whitmore demonstrated complete inability to operate without technological support. Panic overrode judgment. Paralysis overrode action. Intervention required at 1416 Zulu to prevent complete exercise failure. Solution implemented via legacy, hardened circuit, and counter algorithm. Network restored in 347. Subject Whitmore now aware of Oracle designation. Correlation with filed complaint inevitable. System correction in progress. Board of Inquiry convened for 900 Friday, awaiting final phase. She saved the entry. Then she powered down the laptop. She lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside her window. She thought about Whitmore, about the look on his face when he realized what he had done. There was no satisfaction in it for her, no sense of victory. Only a quiet, melancholy recognition that the system had been broken and that fixing it required breaking someone. But that was the nature of institutional correction. It was not gentle. It was not kind. It was necessary. Cass closed her eyes. Tomorrow the reckoning would come. Tomorrow the mask would drop. Tomorrow the truth would be spoken aloud in a way that could not be denied or dismissed. Tomorrow Admiral Whitmore would learn what his complaint had truly cost him. And the system would demonstrate whether it could correct itself or whether it would protect its own failures. Cass already knew the answer. She had designed the test to ensure only one outcome was possible. The system would correct, the culture would improve, and one officer's career would end as a lesson for thousands of others. That was the price of accountability. That was the cost of change. She slept. End of part 2. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. A rare overcast sky blanketed Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, turning the harbor from brilliant blue to muted steel. The Arizona Memorial sat shrouded in mist, a ghost suspended above darker ghosts. Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore had not slept. He sat in his temporary quarters staring at the after-action report on his tablet. The document was brutal in its clinical precision. Every failed command he had issued during Spectral Cascade was timestamped to the millisecond. Every panicked order, every wrong decision. The data logs did not lie, they did not editorialize. They simply showed the truth. And the truth was damning. At 0300 hours, he had tried calling his mentor, a retired four-star admiral who had been his champion for 20 years. The call went to voicemail. Whitmore left no message. What could he say that he had publicly humiliated someone who turned out to be the architect of the most sophisticated wargame the Pacific Fleet had ever conducted? That he had filed formal assault charges against a flag officer, operating under direct Joint Chiefs authority? There were no words for that kind of failure. At 0530, Commander Elliot Hargrove knocked on his door. Whitmore let him in without speaking. Hargrove looked as exhausted as Whitmore felt. His uniform was wrinkled. His eyes were red. "I've been reviewing the regulations," Hargrove said quietly. "There's no mechanism to withdraw a formal complaint once it's been filed and delivered. The system doesn't allow it. Once you sign it becomes part of the official record." Whitmore nodded slowly. He had known this, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way it had not been before. "The board convenes at 0900, Hargrove continued. Vice Admiral Sterling, Rear Admiral Reed, Brigadier General Cross, all three are known for being by the book. Thorough, fair, but unforgiving of procedural violations or abuse of authority." Whitmore looked at him. "What do you think they'll do?" Hargrove hesitated. "Sir, I think they're going to ask why you filed charges against someone you knew nothing about. Why you escalated a minor dining facility dispute into a formal legal action. Why you didn't exercise any restraint or judgment. And what will I say? The truth, sir, that you made a mistake." Whitmore laughed bitterly. "A mistake! I destroyed my career over a lunch table." Hargrove said nothing. There was nothing to say. The man was right. At 0800, Cass sat in her quarters. The aluminum case was open. She had laid out her proper uniform on the bed, the flight suit with the shoulder boards, the silver star gleaming against the olive drab fabric, the phoenix patch with its silver antenna wings, the name tape Thorn. She had not worn this uniform in 8 months. It felt strange to see it laid out, like looking at a photograph of someone she used to be. She showered, dressed in the sterile flight suit one last time, pulled her hair back into the regulation bun. She picked up her tablet and the small recording device that contained the audio from the dining facility incident. Chief Master Sergeant Donovan Kane was waiting outside her door when she emerged. He was in his service dress uniform, his ribbons perfectly aligned. He came to attention and saluted. Cass returned the salute. "Chief," "General," Kane said quietly. "Thought you might want an escort to the VT suite." Cass allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. "That obvious?" "Yes, ma'am, has been since the moment you stepped off that shuttle bus 9 days ago." They walked together across the base. The morning air was cool and damp. A C-17 roared overhead, shaking the ground. Around them, the base continued its daily rhythm. Sailors heading to morning muster. Airmen jogging in formation. Marines running the obstacle course near the flight line. None of them knew what was about to happen, that a reckoning was coming, that the system was about to correct itself in the most public, most final way possible. Kane glanced at her as they walked. "Ma'am, if I may ask, why the charade? Why not just arrive as a general officer? Why strip your rank and observe from the bottom?" Cass considered the question. "Because chief people behave differently when they think no one important is watching. They reveal who they really are. Strip away the rank and you see the character underneath, or the lack of it." Kane nodded slowly. "And Admiral Whitmore? Admiral Whitmore is a symptom, not the disease, Ben. The disease is a culture that rewards confidence over competence, aggression over wisdom, rank over judgment. He's just the latest, loudest example." They reached Building 1, the headquarters complex. Kane held the door open for her. "For what it's worth, ma'am," Kane said, "you've made believers out of a lot of people here. What you did yesterday in the JOC, people won't forget that." "Good," Cass said. "That's the point." The VTC suite was on the second floor, a secure room designed for classified video teleconferences. The walls were soundproofed. The screens were encrypted. A long, polished table dominated the center of the space with a camera array at one end focused on the seats. Whitmore and Hargrove were already there. They sat on one side of the table looking diminished somehow, smaller than they had seemed 2 days ago in the dining facility. Whitmore looked up when Cass entered. His face went pale. He started to stand, then stopped himself, uncertain of the protocol. Was she a civilian, an officer, his superior, his accuser? Cass said nothing. She simply walked to the far end of the table and sat down alone. She placed her tablet in front of her. She did not look at Whitmore. She did not acknowledge him at all. The silence was excruciating. At precisely 0900, the main screen flickered to life. Three faces appeared, stern, professional, absolutely devoid of warmth. In the center was Vice Admiral Malcolm Sterling. He was 56 years old, with steel gray hair and the weathered, intelligent face of a man who had spent 35 years thinking about warfare at the strategic level. He wore his service dress blues. His ribbons were a testament to a career that had spanned every corner of the globe. To his left was Rear Admiral Constance Reed, 50 years old, short dark hair, severe features. She was the head of the Navy JAG office for the Pacific Fleet. She had prosecuted and defended more cases than anyone in the room could count. Her expression suggested she had already made up her mind about what she was seeing. To Sterling's right was Brigadier General Edmund Cross, Air Force, 53 years old, bald, built like a linebacker. He was the Director of Personnel for Pacific Air Forces. His job was to manage careers, evaluate fitness for command, and recommend promotions or removals. He looked like a man who had seen this particular story play out too many times before. Sterling leaned forward slightly. His voice filled the room through the speakers. Cold, authoritative, absolute. This Board of Inquiry is now in session. The purpose of this hearing is to review the events of the past 48 hours concerning the Wardrum Pacific exercise and a formal complaint filed by Rear Admiral Marcus, correction Garrett Whitmore. He paused. His eyes moved from Whitmore to Cass and back again. I have two documents in front of me. One is the after-action report from the Joint Operations Center event codenamed Spectral Cascade. The other is Admiral Whitmore's complaint against an individual identified as Thorne. On the surface, these two documents appear to describe two very different individuals. Let's clarify who we are talking about. Sterling's gaze shifted to Cass at the far end of the table. Ma'am, for the record, would you please state your full name, rank, and current assignment? This was the moment. The institutional correction was beginning. Cass leaned slightly toward the microphone built into the table. Her voice was calm, steady. It filled the silent room. Brigadier General Cassandra Thorne, United States Air Force. My current duty assignment is Special Assistant to the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for Strategic Integration. My temporary assigned role for this operation is Commander Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and Exercise Director for Wardrum Pacific. The words landed in the room like artillery shells. Commander Hargrove's eyes went wide. He stared at her, then at the single star he now imagined on her collar, hidden beneath the sterile flight suit. Base Commander. The title made sense now. The functional commander of the entire installation. Whitmore froze. The blood drained from his face. It was as if every circuit in his body had shorted out at once. A brigadier general, an Air Force general officer, was the base commander he had sent his petty grievance to. The woman he had belittled, threatened, and tried to have arrested was his host commander, a flag officer from a sister service, and by all accounts, a legend in the intelligence community. He had not just insulted a subordinate, he had committed a diplomatic and professional sin of catastrophic proportions. He had laughed and demanded her rank, and the answer had just dismantled his career. Vice Admiral Sterling let the silence hang for a long, painful moment. Then he continued. Thank you, General Thorne. Let the record show that General Thorne is operating under a red cell observation protocol authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to assess command readiness from a bottom-up perspective. Her identity was classified for the purposes of this assessment. The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. A fact, Sterling continued, his voice hardening, that seems to have been overlooked. He turned his attention fully to Whitmore. Admiral Whitmore, your complaint alleges that General Thorne, whom you mistook for an enlisted airman, assaulted your aides. The JOC logs show that less than 12 hours later, she single-handedly prevented the simulated loss of your entire strike group in this joint base. Your complaint also mentions insubordination and disrespect. Sterling paused. General Thorne, do you have any evidence to present regarding the initial encounter in the dining facility? Cass tapped her tablet. A moment later, a crystal-clear audio file played through the room's speakers. Whitmore's voice loud and theatrical. You're in our spot, Sergeant. Lieutenant Parrish's voice eager and aggressive. You heard the Admiral. This table is reserved for senior leadership. Scram! Cass's voice calm and factual. This is a general dining facility. There are no reserved tables. Whitmore again. I'm making it reserved now. Get up and find another seat. Cass, I am not finished. The sound of movement. Confusion. Then Whitmore's voice rising to a shout. Assault? You just assaulted a naval officer. I want your name and your unit right now. The recording ended. Whitmore sat there exposed and humiliated, forced to listen to his own arrogance played back as evidence against him. The receipt. She had recorded everything. Every word, every escalation, every mistake. Rear Admiral Reed spoke for the first time. Her voice was clipped, precise prosecutorial. The log from General Thorne's recording device documents a redirection maneuver consistent with Level 1 use of force protocols for de-escalation. There was no strike, no impact, no injury. Your officers were off-balanced using their own momentum. That is not assault under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That is professional restraint. Sterling leaned back in his chair. Admiral Whitmore there was, however, a clear abuse of rank and authority on your part. You created a public spectacle. You attempted to intimidate a fellow service member based solely on appearance. You ordered physical removal of an individual who had committed no violation. And when your unlawful order was resisted with minimal appropriate force, you filed a frivolous and false official report against a flag officer. He paused. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke. In short, Admiral, you confused your rank with your competence. And in doing so, you failed the most basic test of leadership. You failed to recognize that authority must be earned, not demanded. You failed to exercise judgment. You failed to show restraint. And most damningly, you failed to understand that the woman sitting across from you was testing you. And you failed that test spectacularly. Whitmore opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. What could he say? Every fact was documented. Every mistake was logged. The truth was inescapable. Brigadier General Cross spoke next. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Admiral, I've reviewed your personnel file. 30 years of service. Naval Academy graduate. Decorated combat veteran. Strike Group commander. On paper, you are an exemplary officer. He leaned forward. But paper lies, doesn't it? Because what I saw yesterday in that JOC was an officer who panicked when his technology failed, who issued contradictory orders, who froze when the situation demanded action. You are very good at commanding when everything works, but when the system broke down, you had nothing. No instinct, no creativity, no judgment. Cross gestured toward the screen where the AAR data was now displayed. General Thorne wrote that scenario specifically to test that question. What happens when the network fails, when the data is corrupted, when you can't trust your screens, and the answer, Admiral, is that you fall apart. Whitmore's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them. Sterling spoke again. This board finds that your actions were contrary to the standards expected of a flag officer of the United States Navy. You will be relieved of your command of Carrier Strike Group 5 effective immediately. You will return to Washington for reassignment pending a full fitness for command review. It is the recommendation of this board that you be retired at the rank of captain, a demotion, from rear admiral to captain, stripped of a star, forced into retirement. It was the most severe non-judicial punishment the Navy could impose. Commander Hargrove, Sterling continued, you are cleared of any wrongdoing. Your hesitation during the dining facility incident is noted and commended. You recognized that the situation was escalating inappropriately and attempted to counsel restraint. That is the mark of a good officer. Hargrove exhaled slowly. He had not realized he had been holding his breath. Sterling turned his attention back to Quassez. His expression softened slightly. Not warm, but respectful. General Thorne, the Joint Chiefs extend their gratitude for your vivid demonstration of the vulnerabilities in our command culture. Your assessment has been noted at the highest levels. The recommendations in your report will be implemented across all combatant commands. Cass nodded once. Thank you, Admiral. Sterling's image flickered. This board is adjourned. The screen went black. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Whitmore sat motionless. His career built over 3 decades had just collapsed in 15 minutes. Hargrove sat beside him, unsure whether to offer comfort or simply leave. Cass stood. She picked up her tablet. She looked at Whitmore for the first time since entering the room. Admiral, she said quietly, you had every opportunity to choose differently. In the dining facility. In your office when Commander Hargrove advised caution. Even yesterday in the JOC when you could have asked for help instead of demanding control. Leadership is not about authority, it's about judgment. And you chose poorly, every single time. She walked to the door. She paused and looked back. I hope you learn from this. Then she left. Whitmore sat alone with Hargrove for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I destroyed myself. Hargrove did not disagree. The next morning, Cass returned to the Joint Operations Center. The atmosphere was profoundly different. The usual low hum of conversation ceased the moment she entered. Every operator, every officer, every enlisted member turned to look at her. But this time she was not wearing the sterile flight suit. She wore her proper uniform. The olive drab flight suit with the silver star on each shoulder board, the phoenix patch on her left shoulder, the antenna wings gleaming in the overhead lights, the name tape on her chest. Thorn. The ribbons over her left breast told a story of deployments, commendations, and a career spent in the shadows of electronic warfare. There was no mockery in their eyes, no confusion, only a deep, resounding respect. Chief Master Sergeant Kane stood near the C4I console. He saw her enter and immediately straightened his posture. He walked to meet her, stopping directly in front of her. He did not speak. He simply raised his hand in a sharp, perfectly executed salute. It was an offering, a silent apology for the entire institution's failure, a clear acknowledgement of her authority. Cass met his eyes and returned the salute with a crisp nod. Then a ripple went through the room. One by one, every uniformed person in the JOC rose to their feet. Ensign Callum Drexler, who had been on the verge of collapse during Spectral Cascade. The intelligence officers who had watched her triangulate the enemy submarine. Lieutenant Parrish and Lieutenant Brennan, who had been redirected in the dining facility and now understood exactly who had done it. They all stood at attention. A forest of salutes bloomed across the operations floor, offered up to the woman they had all underestimated. It was a spontaneous, powerful ritual of recognition. Commander Hargrove stood among them. He executed his salute and held at his face a mixture of respect and residual shame for his own complicity. Cass returned the salutes. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the silent room. As you were. The salutes dropped in unison. People returned to their consoles. But the energy had changed. The quiet hum of work resumed, but with a new palpable intensity. The swagger was gone. In its place was something quieter. Better. A focused professionalism that had not existed before. Cass walked to the holographic map at the center of the room. The display had been updated. The Wardrome Pacific exercise icons were gone. In their place were new symbols. Real-world assets moving into position in the South China Sea. A new operation, unnamed, classified. She studied the map for a moment, her mind already analyzing the disposition of forces, the potential threats, the vulnerabilities. Chief Kane appeared at her side. He looked at the map, then at her. Quite a mess you uncovered, General, he said quietly. Cass's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. The mess was always there, Chief. I just made it visible. Kane nodded. What happens now? Now, Cass turned to look at him. Now the system knows it can correct itself. That's the point, not to punish Whitmore, but to prove that when the institution is forced to confront its failures, it can choose to fix them. She gestured to the room around them. Look at this place. Yesterday, half these people were afraid to question authority. Today, they've seen what happens when authority is questioned appropriately, when competence is valued over rank. That's the culture change we needed. Kane smiled faintly. Correction achieved. Cass allowed herself a small smile. Correction achieved. She turned back to the map. The next mission was already loading. New threats, new challenges. The work was never finished, but the culture was quieter, better. And that was enough. 6 weeks later, Rear Admiral Garrett Whitmore sat in a hearing room at the Pentagon. The Board for Correction of Naval Records had convened to review his case. His demotion to captain had been finalized. His retirement date was set for the end of the month. He sat alone at a table, no lawyer, no aides, no friends, just him and the weight of his mistakes. The board asked him one question. Captain Whitmore, what have you learned from this experience? He thought for a long time before answering. I learned, he said slowly, that rank is not the same as respect, that authority is not the same as competence, and that the people you underestimate are often the ones who see you most clearly. The board thanked him for his service and dismissed him. He walked out of the Pentagon into the gray Washington afternoon. He was 52 years old. A civilian now for all practical purposes. His career was over. But in a strange way, he felt lighter than he had in years. Commander Elliot Hargrove was promoted to captain and reassigned as the aide to Vice Admiral Sterling. In his first week in the new position, he encountered Cass in the corridor outside Sterling's office. She was in Washington for a series of briefings on the Red Cell assessment results. She wore her service dress uniform, the silver star gleaming. Hargrove came to attention and saluted. General, Cass returned the salute. Captain, congratulations on the promotion. Thank you, ma'am. He hesitated. I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened at Pearl Harbor. I should have pushed back harder, should have refused to write that complaint. Cass studied him for a moment. Captain, you hesitated. That's what leaders do. You recognized the situation was wrong and tried to counsel restraint. That you were overruled is not your failure. It's Whitmore's. Hargrove nodded slowly. I learned from the best, ma'am, even if I didn't know it at the time. Cass smiled. Then the lesson wasn't wasted. She continued down the corridor, leaving Hargrove standing there, a man who had witnessed a reckoning and emerged better for it. 3 months after the incident, Cass was promoted to Major General and appointed as the Director of Joint Warfighting Concept Development. Her new office was in the Pentagon 3 floors below the tank where this entire operation had begun. On her first day, she opened her laptop and created a new file. Red Cell Phase 2 Culture Recalibration Initiative. She had identified 18 more friction points during her time at Pearl Harbor. 18 more places where ego and authority clashed with competence and judgment. 18 more opportunities for correction. The work was just beginning. 1 year later, Cass was invited to give a lecture at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. The auditorium was packed. Officers from all 5 services, civilians from the defense industry, academics studying military culture. The title of her lecture appeared on the screen behind her authority versus competence lessons from Wardrome Pacific. Cass stood at the podium. She wore her service dress uniform. 2 stars now, Major General. But she still wore the Phoenix patch on her shoulder. FIDE's antennas. Faith in the antennas. Faith in the signals. Faith in the truth. She began. 9 months ago, I sat alone at a table in a dining facility at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. I was wearing a flight suit with no rank, no name, no unit. To everyone around me, I was invisible. Unimportant. Beneath notice. She paused. And that invisibility allowed me to see something that is often hidden when rank and authority are visible. I saw the truth about how we lead, how we command, how we treat the people we believe are beneath us. She advanced the slide. An image of the Arizona Memorial appeared. 1,177 sailors are entombed beneath that memorial. They died because a system failed to recognize the warning signs of an attack, because leaders did not listen to the signals that were there, because authority overrode judgment. Another slide. The holographic map from the JOC during spectral cascade. Chaos. Red strobes. Corrupted data. This is what happens when we confuse our tools with our competence. When we rely on technology to make us smart instead of making ourselves wise enough to use technology well. When we believe that rank grants us infallibility. She looked out at the audience, at the officers watching her with rapt attention. Culture is not rebuilt in a day, she said. It is corrected one decision at a time. One moment of humility at a time. One willingness to say, I don't know at a time. One choice to listen instead of demand. The final slide appeared, a single line of text. Correction is not punishment. Correction is progress. Cass stepped away from the podium. Thank you. The applause was immediate, sustained, respectful. As she left the stage, she thought about Whitmore, about where he was now. She had heard he was teaching high school mathematics in Virginia, living quietly, staying out of the public eye. She hoped he had learned, hoped he was better for the experience. But whether he was or not, the system had learned, and that was what mattered. In a darkened office in the Pentagon, a figure sat alone watching a recording of Cass's lecture. The office belonged to the Secretary of Defense. When the video ended, the secretary leaned back in the chair and smiled. A voice spoke from the shadows. An aide. She passed the test. More than that, the secretary replied. She proved the concept works. Red Cell cultural assessments. Bottom-up observation. Exposing toxic leadership before it causes catastrophic failure. The aide stepped forward. What's next? The secretary opened a folder on the desk. Inside were files, dozens of them, bases around the world, commands across all services, each one flagged with the same assessment, cultural vulnerabilities detected. Phase 3, the secretary said. We send her to fix the entire joint force. The screen faded to black. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Brigadier General Cassandra Thorne sat in the back seat of a C-17 Globemaster. She was heading to her next assignment. Another base. Another observation. Another correction. She looked out the small window at the clouds below. at the vast expanse of ocean stretching to the horizon. The work was never finished. The mission was never complete, but that was fine. Because she had faith in the antennas, faith in the signals, faith that the truth when brought into the light would always correct the darkness. Fide's antennas, always.